Hi, and welcome or welcome back to the Future of SaaS Festival. We hope you're enjoying the presentation so far. Just a quick reminder, if you're not already a member of our Slack community, follow the link at the top of the event website to network and join the discussion.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the session this morning. My name is Rav Dhaliwal. I'm a former software executive and currently I work as an investor and venture partner in a number of growth equity and venture funds, and I also do quite a lot of advisory work. For anyone who would like to follow along or connect, I'm pretty easy to find, so please feel free to do so. So I've been fortunate enough to start my career in the early part of my career working for a lot of large global multinational companies. I'm sure many of you recognize the logos. But I've really spent the last 10 to 12 years being very fortunate to work as an early employee in some very, very fast growing startups that either got acquired or went public. And it's really the experience of sales and customer success in these earlier stage fast growing businesses that I want to share with you today. Now, what we're going to cover today is we're going to look at sort of some of the history around sales and how we do software sales. And that's because almost every aspect of building and running a software business has really been studied, measured, and systematized over the years, none more so than building and running a commercial sales organization. But there's still yet new things to learn. And we'll talk about how that way we do sales, some of the challenges that creates for us in the contemporary cloud SaaS world. We'll look at one of the possible innovations that has happened over the years and talk about some of its pros and cons. And then we'll round off by talking about what I believe is the missing piece in software sales and provide you a checklist to see if you can go about avoiding some of those common pitfalls with our current sales approach. And so, as I mentioned, almost every aspect of building and running a software business has been studied. Now, if we were to compare the sales team of a contemporary subscription-based startup to one in the perpetually licensed era from 25 years ago, where we sold software that was on premises, and when we sold it, the customer was perpetually licensed. They could use the software forever. And that was typically associated with that a very high deployment effort. Either you would use professional services from the vendor, or you would have to, as a customer, put in a lot of effort to just get the software deployed and up and running. And related to that was customers would have to sink a lot of costs into infrastructure, servers, racks, data centers to host and run your software. And that's because basically buying software 25 years ago was a capital expenditure. You were making a material capital spend in order to use the vendor software. And so that resulted in a very familiar set of activities associated around selling. So this is kind of a very familiar production line of inbound and outbound sales activities such as lead generation, qualification, pilots, negotiation, and all being well, contract signatures. And what we would find in this model, that if we were to use it back 25 years ago, the job of the sales team was quite rightly considered to be complete at deal closure, at contract signature. And that's because, as I say, the customer was making a capital expenditure where they were perpetually licensed, and the effort in deploying and using the software was so high, their ability or their desire to maybe move to an alternative solution was much, much lower. Also, in this on-premises world, when we sold software, we got almost all of the customer's money, 80–90% of it up front. So it was absolutely correct to consider that the job of the sales team was done when we closed the first deal. Now, despite there being a quarter of century gap between that on-premises era and where we find ourselves today, where largely people building and selling software are building it on the cloud. And people don't have perpetual license in cloud pretty much. They have a subscription. They rent the software licenses from you either on a monthly or yearly basis. And with it, there's very little to no deployment effort. What can sometimes happen, there's some effort to configure the software, but we don't really have a lot of sunk infrastructure costs anymore now with using cloud software. And so that makes the switching costs to alternative solutions much lower and generally much less friction. So if we buy a cloud software, we're actually making an operating expenditure. And that means, and because of the nature of how it's delivered, the lack of any real heavy deployment or infrastructure requirements on our end, we can switch out to another solution a lot easier. However, despite all these profound shifts in how we build, distribute, license, and consume software, we're still using largely the same sales motion as we did 25 years ago in the on-premises era. So in the past, where it was very common for software entrepreneurs to have come up through the ranks of sales and marketing, today we are just as likely to find founders who have a product, technical, or engineering background. And so what that means is that they usually have to rely very heavily or lean heavily on their ecosystem of advisors and investors and peers in order to learn how to build a commercial sales team. And what you can see here is that the challenge for contemporary founders is that the sales function they are kind of inculcated and encouraged to build today was designed for an era where a previous era where purchasing software, as I mentioned, was a capital expenditure with the licenses being paid for upfront and granted in perpetuity, and where the likelihood of the customer switching to an alternative because of all of the costs they'd sunk in on infrastructure and deployment was kind of far less likely or quite low. But even now, with all of the dynamics of building, selling, distributing, and the change in the license model, we're still using largely the same set of inbound and outbound sales steps. And we still, despite the fact customers rent licenses and they can change easily, we still have the mindset that the job of sales is considered complete at contract signature. Now, as I mentioned, if we were to fast forward for today and look at compare our historical on-premises company with our contemporary SaaS business, we would find they're using this very same orthodox sales production line. Now, one major difference between our contemporary SaaS company and our historical on-premises company is that our contemporary SaaS company would have a function that almost certainly didn't exist 25 years ago, and that would be customer success. And the proliferation of customer success teams can, in no small part, be attributed to one of the pioneer of software as a service, Salesforce, with its approach to customers for life, providing the blueprint for many contemporary startups. Now, what is less discussed is that Salesforce's very significant investments in pioneering cloud and customer success were actually a reaction to revenue churn that was rapidly approaching double digits, and which they had left unchecked would have ultimately sunk the company. They didn't really have people to help the customer with and advise them and coach them on the configuration effort. And there was very low switching costs because it was delivered by cloud. And so they built customer success as a defensive reaction to churn that was, as I say, rapidly approaching double digits, and which, if had left unchecked, would have ultimately sunk their business. Now, historic Salesforce's continued business success has unintentionally left a contemporary startup with a template whereby the sales team is still operating in much the same orthodox way as it did before. But the challenges that SaaS creates of easier churn and not getting our money up front, but getting it collected every month like rent, they're assumed to have been solved by bolting on the addition of customer success into this production line. And you'll notice here, it's not just adding customer success to the production line, it's putting a very hard wall between the sales and the post-sales motion. And so the reality is that in this scenario, the job of sales is still very much considered complete at contract signature. And the reality is that even the best functioning customer success teams are really still largely focused on solving the problems of that legacy perpetual sales motion that's being used, instead of being able to proactively create the conditions for new revenue growth. They find themselves stuck in a very defensive revenue retention posture. And then for contemporary founders and contemporary startups, that leaves the startup with a potentially fatal commercial gap that needs to be addressed. And why is this? Why has this come about? Well, it's fundamentally because the orthodox sales approach that we've been using for the last few decades only concerns itself with two types of sales. The first one is inbound sales, prospects coming to you, which you qualify and convert in or out, and outbound sales, where we do sales marketing outbound to find our ideal customers, engage them, and sell to them. But really, the reality of the subscription era is that if we want to have sustainable new revenue, it does require our startup to master a third and vitally important type of sales that's not actually meaningfully accounted or incentivized for in the sales orthodoxy, and that's what I call continuous sales. And this is really the missing piece of software sales. So in a continuous sales motion, customers need to be first and foremost continually sold on the value of that initial software purchase they've made. And they need to see that value realized in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of effort on their part. And we want to be doing that because what we want to do is maximizes our chances of identifying additional value, i.e. additional revenue for us in the period that they are renting their licenses from us. And making this a reality should be the primary goal of every customer success team, as it's only when this initial value has been realized that the startup will earn the right to come back to talk to its customers about new revenue opportunities. Another way to think about it is, in a continuous sales motion, customer success creates the product usage conditions for new revenue. Now, the key thing here to make a continuous sales motion successful and to make it really, really effective, it requires the mirroring of the commercial roles that sold the product initially. And not just the roles, but the incentives that own that initial sale. So specifically, we need the commercial skills of an account executive or an account manager and the product skills of the sales engineer to have their counterparts after the sale. So customer success managers, they very nicely mirror the product and use case and technical and opportunity identification skills of an SE, but unless they're aligned with a suitably incentivized commercial counterpart, that's actually focusing on qualifying in and out the potential new revenue opportunities that hopefully closes some of those and works along with the CS person to identify proactively more and more additional value, unless they're mirrored with someone who will own the commercial health and create the commercial conditions for new revenue, your continuous sales motion won't function, especially if they are not aligned and incentivized to work with each other. And so this mirroring of roles, to break it down a bit further, if we look at the skills and the incentives that it took to close the first sale with a customer, we had a commercial owner, a commercial person, an account executive paired with a technical product focused use case person, a solutions engineer, and they typically work on and are aligned on a common territory, a common book of business, either by geography, department, or customer size. And they typically, to make this work, have a shared incentive structure. So they will have an overlapping amount of their incentive will be on things like ACV and deal closure rates, but the percentages of them may be different, weighted differently for AE and SE, but they have shared targets by which to align with each other on top of their territory alignment. And in a continuous sales motion, i.e. the next sale and the next sale and the next sale we want to do with a customer, we need to mirror that. We need to have a commercial owner. In this case, it could be a commercial account manager, it could very well be the original AE, so long as we compensate them appropriately. And this time, the mirror of our solutions engineer is the customer success manager. And again, to make this work, they need to be aligned again on a common territory, a common book of business of customers, and again, have a shared incentive structure. So we may weight their incentives differently on different targets, but they have to have common and overlapping targets for there to be an incentive for them to work together on driving new revenue. And so if we organize and incentivize for a continuous sales motion rather than that linear production line, we see our AE and SE are not in pre-sales, they're in a prospect phase. So they are looking and working with prospects and converting those prospects to paid customers. And then everything after that is a growth phase, which is handled by our commercial owner, in this case, the AM, with their paired product owner, the CSM. And hopefully this should create a continuous sales motion of delivering fast value, uncovering new value, qualifying that value in and out, hopefully closing it, and so on and so on and so on. And so for those of you who are interested in either assessing whether you have a good continuous sales motion or thinking of building one, I'm going to leave you now with a checklist of 5 simple things to check to make sure that you are heading along that path of not just perfecting inbound and outbound, but also perfecting continuous sales. And the first question is that you want to ask yourself is, who has commercial ownership of a customer after that initial first sale is concluded? Now, if the answer to this question is customer success, then you've not properly mirrored the commercial skills needed for that continuous sales motion. Or to put it another way, if it takes you 2 sets of skills to close the initial sale, why does it then only take 1 set of skills to close all subsequent sales? Have you mirrored those roles and those incentive structures that made that first sale? So if you've mirrored the commercial and product owners with either the original account executive or an account manager working with a customer success manager, are they both suitably incentivized to make driving new revenue from existing customers worth their while? If not, then you will very likely end up reinforcing that orthodox sales mindset that the job of sales is complete at first contract signature. If you've successfully mirrored both of those owner roles and incentivized them correctly, are they aligned on a common book of business, a common territory? If not, your continuous sales motion will lack efficiency because of misaligned prioritization and resourcing on new revenue growth opportunities, and that in turn will hinder your ability to scale the business. And in deal reviews, are you as sales leaders or founders, are you mandating that before a deal can be closed won, that there's a plan in place to set up customers for long-term product success and for future new revenue? If not, you will likely find that the necessary discovery, engagement, and mindset required for continuous sales will not be taking place. And finally, the key question for all contemporary founders and startups, one that's absolutely important to ask yourself is, who owns the net revenue retention number? And that's because this is the key metric to ensuring the long-term viability of any SaaS business. And it's an ideal one for these continuous sales mirrored roles to collectively own. However, if the answer to this question is, well, nobody owns it, we report on it, but nobody owns it, then there's a potentially fatal commercial gap that exists in the business that needs to be addressed quickly, especially if you have aspirations for your startup to become an industry bellwether and leader. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your kind attention. For anyone who's interested in learning more, I've written about this topic and a number of similar ones on Medium. Alternatively, I'm very easy to get hold of if you have any questions. And with that, I'd like to thank you again and move over to the Q&A. Thank you.